Hey, very glad you're with us for the Thursday edition of the Martini Lunch. There's a lot to get to, and I think you know what we're going to be talking about most of the day, and that's the ICE-involved shooting in Minneapolis yesterday and some of the ramifications that are still going on today. We'll also be taking a look at some speculation on an open U.S. Senate seat, this time in Iowa. But before we get into all of that, a quick update on one of yesterday's martinis, in which we highlighted President Trump earlier this week saying that Republicans in Congress needed to be a little bit flexible on the Hyde Amendment, meaning taxpayer funding of abortion. Doesn't look like the Republicans have any intention of being flexible on that, thankfully. Melanie Zanona over at NBC tweeting out yesterday, I asked Speaker Johnson about Trump's suggestion yesterday that Republicans be flexible on Hyde language in a health care deal. Quote, we are not going to change the standard, that we're not going to use taxpayer funding for abortion. I'm just not going to allow that to happen, unquote. So assuming that ends up being the case, that's a definite win for the pro-life side, Jim.
It is, and it's reassuring to hear that. Speaker seems to have his finger on the pulse of pro-lifers, and well appreciated. You know, this may fade away. I hope the president hears this signal, understands this is a bridge too far for pro-lifers and moves on. Last thing you'd want to see in the middle of a already very busy time of year for Republicans is a spat between the speaker and the president.
Yeah, definitely. A lot to get done. We could have another shutdown before the month's over. Who knows? We'll talk about that maybe a little bit towards the end of our conversation today. But let's first of all tell you about Noble Gold. We're off to a new year, and no one really knows what 2026 is going to bring. The news cycle has already been very clear about that. Elections, markets, military action, who knows? But we do know that gold and silver have outlasted every empire, every crash, and every currency. And so if you want to get a better, more diversified portfolio, and especially looking at gold and precious metals for your retirement, you can't do any better than Noble Gold.
You work hard for your money. You want your money to go to work for you. You want it to figure out some way to increase in value. And you're never going to have a lack of people giving advice. You have no idea whether you can trust those people. Well, the people at Noble Gold, they're here to serve and guide people through complex topics with patience and clarity. They know the markets, they know the metals, and they know the strategies. No hype, no gimmicks, just honest, fact-based insights and clear options.
Exactly. And like I've said, I've talked with Colin Plume and the team over there at Noble Gold Investments. Very calm, very clear, extremely knowledgeable. They're not trying to force you into anything. They'll explain all your options and give you all the space you need to make the right decisions. And this is the year to create a stable financial future. So go to noblegoldinvestments.com/3ML and download their free gold and silver guide. When you open a qualified account, you'll receive a complimentary 3-ounce silver virtue coin. Visit noblegoldinvestments.com/3ML. That's noblegoldinvestments.com/3ML. All right, Jim, on to our first martini. And it's not easy to find a good martini as it relates to yesterday's incident with the ICE-involved shooting in Minneapolis. We're going to be talking about this from a lot of different angles for a pretty good chunk of today's podcast. But the good martini today is a sober-minded, kind of frame-by-frame look at the video that most people saw yesterday as they were paying attention to this story from Tom Yamas and Tom Winter over at NBC at a time when many of the mainstream networks were screeching about murder and how evil ICE is. NBC kept their heads and said this.
Stuff we were learning from the get-go. Again, the police chief saying this vehicle was blocking the federal agents right there.
That's right, Tom. And a big caveat, we don't know what happened before this, but they're definitely going to look at the fact this is an unmarked vehicle, but the lights are on. These are clearly members of law enforcement, so that's at least known to this driver.
Let's play the video because something else happens right here. Those officers approach the vehicle. They try to open the door. Let's stop it here. How will this help the investigators?
Whatever is said here, what these officers say, if the driver said anything or not, could really help them understand whether or not they thought there was some sort of an imminent threat. Was this person trying to listen to them? Were they scared? Or was this going to be a problem?
And then, of course, what the driver does next. Let's play that video. Trying to leave there. One of the officers felt like they were forced to fire, and they do. We want to show another angle, reverse angle of the same incident here. We're going to freeze it. This is that same angle here. And what does this show us, Tom?
Well, this appears to show an officer right in front of the vehicle. That, in between the way that the vehicle was moving and the timeline of that, how was the officer responding in that split second going to be critical for investigators.
Finally, one more piece of evidence we want to talk about here, and it is the bullet hole in the front of the windshield. What will this tell investigators?
Well, you look at this, you look at ballistics, you look at witness statements, you look at other video, all going to be part of this investigation.
investigation. And so that's kind of the way you need to look at it. A lot of more investigation is going to be done here. As you wrote in the Jolt today, Jim, it seems very reasonable that this officer thought that his life in danger as the car was revving up and so forth. We had, a statement also from Tom Homan, the border czar, not jumping to conclusions. He was saying, I wasn't there. I haven't seen all the different angles. There'll be an investigation. We'll get to the bottom of this. And so I said it would be unprofessional to comment on what I think happened in that situation, which is very different than what just about everybody else did yesterday. And so we'll get into some of the less pleasant aspects of this whole story in a little bit. But good to know that some people actually kept their heads yesterday.
I was going to say, for anyone wondering, why is this the good martini? Well, the good martini is that this exists. And actually, from NBC, not a news organization that we're regular cheerleaders of, going through sober-minded, clear, step-by-step. I found it very useful. My colleague, Andy McCarthy, who sometimes makes guest appearances on this program, federal prosecutor for 20 years. And he goes through not just the law and, what's under the Federal Penal Code, Section 111, but also he points out one of his first cases, a young prosecutor, was an assault on a federal officer, probation officer. The defendant was convicted, even though he never actually struck the officer. It was just a clenched fist and assumed an offensive stance. I assume he's, lining up to fight somebody. That, he says, is that you don't actually have to commit battery in order for it to be considered an assault on a federal agent. The fact that she's, driving with a federal agent in front of her means that the officer has a reasonable reason to believe that she intends to harm him or other people, and that is why he took the action that he did, ending her life. Now, this doesn't mean that it's not sad. This doesn't mean that it's not tragic. It doesn't mean that this, it's very reasonable to wish that it had not led to this. However, this appears to be consistent with the law. You saw the term murder get thrown around. Murder has a very specific meaning under the law, right? An unlawful killing of a human being with malice. This appears to be consistent with both law and Department of Homeland Security. And I just looked it up, even though ICE is not part of the Department of Justice. Federal agents pretty much have the same rules of engagement when it comes to using lethal force. Appears consistent with the law, consistent with policy, and no discernible malice. Now, we can point out that we don't, again, if ICE has begun an investigation, that investigation is in its very earliest stages, right? We don't know the name of this officer. We don't know how long he's been on the job. Christy Noem, the DHS secretary, said that he's an experienced officer yesterday. We don't know how and when he was trained. We don't know whether he's been involved in other shootings or other cases with the use of lethal force. We don't know if he's ever been disciplined or reprimanded for his actions in the field. I've seen a report that this officer was in a previous incident dragged for 300 feet by a vehicle while attempting to arrest an illegal immigrant. That's the sort of thing that that may explain very much why he perceived a moving vehicle coming at him as a threat. But I'm going to use an entirely hypothetical example. I don't know if this is the case for this officer. If I'd said there's a police officer involved shooting, by the way, the previous night the officer found out that his wife was sleeping with his brother. Well, that might have an effect on the mindset of the officer. So traditionally in law enforcement, when there's an officer involved shooting, all of these things get reviewed. The ballistics, the positioning of the people, what was said in the immediate run-up to the shooting, mindset of the officer, all these kinds of things go into to figure out, was this a legitimate use of force? Based on what we know now, this appears to be a legitimate use of force. I suppose information could come forward that would make us look at this differently, but based on it, that's what we know. Credit to Tom Homan for saying, look, we just found out about this. We're going to do a full review, and I'm not going to prejudge or make any comments until that review's done. And good for NBC News. Now, as we're about to talk in our forthcoming martini, not everybody had the same approach to this highly tense, potentially incendiary situation.
No, that's exactly right. And since the woman, a 37-year-old woman, died as a result of the shooting, we don't know what her intent was. Was she just trying to get out of there? Was she malicious towards the officer? We just don't know. We just don't know. But as others have pointed out, including our friend John Gabriel, if your goal here is to obstruct law enforcement operations, you are putting yourself in a position where difficult things can happen. When you put yourself in that situation, it's not hard to understand why they would think that their lives are being threatened in that situation.
I was going to say, my colleague Charlie Cook is a good piece going through how not to think about or how not to talk about this, and he goes through some of these. And it could have been any of us. Well, really, it couldn't have, unless you yourself can imagine a circumstance in which you're hitting the accelerator, driving towards a federal law enforcement officer with a gun pointed at you. Most of us are never going to do something like that. Now, maybe this woman panicked, maybe, and if so, this makes it even more tragic. But the law enforcement officer has every reason to believe that that vehicle coming at him and potentially to other people is a threat to others' lives.
Yeah, no question. All right. Well, like we said, much more on the less responsible side in just a moment here on the 3 Martini Lunch. But first, let's talk about your business. And, you're ramping up. Maybe you had some time off over the holidays, and you were probably already thinking about how to make your business more efficient, more effective, how to grow sales and profits. That's the end game, right? Well, this is the time when we take a look at some of the different parts of the business and think maybe there is a better way to do all this. And there is when it comes to your phone system. Streamlining your communications is one of the quickest and easiest upgrades you can make. And that's why today's episode is brought to you by Quo, spelled Q-U-O, the smarter way to run your business communications.
Quo is the #1 rated business phone system on G2 with more than 3,000 reviews. It's built for how modern teams work. That's why more than 90,000 businesses, from solo operators to growing teams, rely on Quo to stay connected, stay professional, and let their clients know they are consistently reachable.
Absolutely right. And it's easy. Calls, texts, voicemails, transcripts, contact details, all live in one clean view. So make this year the year where no opportunity and no customer slips away. Try Quo for free, plus get 20% off your first 6 months when you go to quo.com/3ml. That's quo.com/3ml. Quo. No missed calls, no missed customers. All right, Jim. Well, like we said, some people were more responsible yesterday in reacting to what we saw in Minneapolis. Other people most certainly not. You had Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer saying, "What's ICE doing in neighborhoods? They shouldn't even be there at all." And I'm thinking, do you know what their job is? I mean, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Then you've got your left-wing politicians in Minnesota. It seems like Minnesota is the political epicenter these days with all the fraud. And then this now, Tim Walz yesterday saying this in response to everything.
And from here on, I have a very simple message. We do not need any further help from the federal government. To Donald Trump and Kristi Noem, you've done enough. There's nothing more important than Minnesotan safety. I've issued a warning order to prepare the Minnesota National Guard. We have soldiers in training and prepared to be deployed if necessary. I remind you, a warning order is a heads up for folks. And these National Guard troops are our National Guard troops. They're teachers in your community, they're business owners, they're construction professionals. They are Minnesotans. Minnesota will not allow our community to be used as a prop in a national political fight. We will not take the bait. We will continue to update you, Minnesota, as we get more information.
That was a pretty confusing statement. There are a lot of folks, Jim, yesterday because he also mentioned, we've never been at war with the federal government before. So is he getting the National Guard ready to confront ICE, or is he getting the National Guard ready to make sure the protests don't turn into what they did back in the summer of 2020 in Minneapolis? And then you had the mayor, Jacob Fry, who was throwing a hissy fit yesterday, dropping F-bombs and saying ICE needs to get the bleep out of Minneapolis.
Yeah,
and so
we
forth.
can't play that video and audio on this family-friendly-ish podcast. Yeah.
It's exactly right. And then you've got folks like Chris Murphy, senator from Connecticut, who's never one to keep a cool head in this situation, suggesting, well, we can't fund the government past the end of this month at the current levels for ICE. That's just a non-starter for us. So it's already setting the table for potentially another shutdown fight. But what do you make of how folks reacted irresponsibly yesterday?
Greg, the moment I heard about this, I just let out this long sigh. And besides the sadness for the woman who lost her life and who put herself in these circumstances where the federal law enforcement officer is firing at her, there was just this exasperation, this exhaustion, because we knew the sheer number of figures in our political environment who we're not going to wait for the facts, who believe that they'd seen enough from that video to jump to conclusions and to basically pour gasoline onto the fire. By the way, I was not really impressed with Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem and her declaration that she was going to ask the Department of Justice to prosecute this woman as a domestic terrorist. Newsflash, she's dead. You cannot bring criminal charges against the dead. Maybe she's talking about somebody else. It just did not see. And again, I don't know if I love the Secretary of Homeland Security showing up in her specialized uniform and the need to make the most dramatic statement possible. I think Homan's approach of Joe Friday, just the facts, would have been more helpful. That said, that pales in comparison to is it I forgot what the pronunciation is. It Jacob Frey or is it Jacobin Frey? Jacobin. But either way, just the F-bombs and he's so angry and all that stuff. Look, it's not surprising that this happened. And as for Governor Walz, the two-term and only two-term Governor Walz. Apparently he meant that he was calling out the National Guard for potential riot prevention. It's not like we haven't seen riots in Minneapolis in the past when it comes to police actions. And in fact, in fact, you almost would say in a lot of cities you have riots. In Minneapolis, they burned down a police station, right? They have Molotov cocktails, right? This, today at the end of today's Jolt, we talk about it. You referred to Minnesota being the center of the political universe. Some days it seems like Minnesota is punching well above its weight in terms of not just political dysfunction, but political dysfunction that sends out ripples across a pond across the rest of the country with consequences for the rest of the country. You kind of knew the moment, ICE involved in a shooting, that everybody who currently hates the Trump administration's immigration enforcement policies were going to treat this as the worst thing ever, that this was the next Rodney King. This was the next, egregious case of police abuse, and that, everyone must rise up against this. And you knew that everybody who supported the Trump administration's policies was going to insist everything is hunky-dory. This woman absolutely deserved what was coming to her. This is, the instant declaration of her as a domestic terrorist, by Noam seemed to be in that category. It's kind of deeply frustrating. This is a time where you need people to calm people's passions down. This is when you guys said you need Joe Friday. You want to put water on the fire, not gasoline. That's not what we got here. You mentioned, Minnesota has had not just, your garden variety fraud scandals, but massive fraud scandals, and a state establishment and state government that has either been egregiously and unforgivably asleep at the wheel, or is complicit in some sense with the people who are committing this fraud. A lot of it tied to the Somali community. But let's point out, there's been some generalizations here. Whites are defrauding the state government too, and I kind of feel like on behalf of the white community, we're getting overlooked, we're getting snubbed, we're not getting the recognition we deserve. This is not just a Somali ball game here, all right? Let's I mean, some would say we probably need affirmative action within the fraud programs. We need something to promote those underdeserved communities like whites. My tongue is very much in cheek for anybody who's from Media Matters who then wants to turn this into an issue. But obviously Tim Walz and Mayor Frey and State Attorney General Ellison and every Democratic official in the state of Minnesota would desperately love to talk about anything except these fraud scandals. So in some level, this is manna from heaven for them. This is a chance to talk about how much they hate Trump, to how much they hate ICE, to talk about how much they hate the administration's immigration enforcement policies, and to try to make it about that. And I just want to point out before we move on to the next topic, Greg, Minneapolis public schools closed school today and tomorrow. We hear a lot about how education is really important. Whenever a politician gets in trouble, they always default to a Whitney Houston song. I believe the children are the future. Teach them well and let them lead the way. Right. Kamala Harris wanted to put parents in jail if their kids didn't show up to school. That's how important attending public school is. Unless there's a political controversy, then we cancel it for 2 days. Then it's like a snow day, and trust me, it's up in Minneapolis. They know how to deal with snow. They referred to, quote, safety concerns related to today's incidents around the city. No further elaboration on that. Now, does this mean we're afraid there's going to be riots across the city? Thankfully, last night was fairly quiet. I can't say that's a crazy fear, but also riots tend to happen at night. Is there a reason to think there's going to be riots all over the city all day today and all day Friday? You don't think it? Are they worried about anti-ICE protests turning violent? Is this some sort of crazy idea of, our teachers and students are afraid to go to school because they're afraid they're going to get shot by ICE? I just posted about this in the corner, and it took my colleague Charlie Cook 30 seconds to respond. It's because of the teachers' unions. Yes. They want to protest, and or they want parents to drag their kids to these protests and stuff like that. Well, look, the purpose of schools is to educate children. It's not there to act as an adjunct of the local Democratic Party. There is no good reason to, look, if somebody said we have really good reason to believe that there's going to be an ICE protest near this school and it's going to turn violent, All right, I would find that reasonable. The idea that 98 schools all across the city, 229,000 students, 59 square miles, not a single one of them it's safe for the kids to go to school today. No, I'm sorry, I don't believe that's either total nonsense or a declaration that the Minneapolis Police Department and the state police and these National Guardsmen that Tim Walz says that they cannot guarantee safety in the city, and that is an admission of failure. So. And just kind of find it like it is a demonstration. Minnesota just looks dysfunctional right now. It just looks like it can't do basic things like keep the schools open, keep the streets safe, enforce the law. It just, you want to say it's cold Mogadishu or something. It's understandable why people are giving those kind of derisive nicknames. So, I think all of us are just exasperated and exhausted with Minnesota right now, and in particular Minneapolis. And I'm not surprised. I wish we had a more responsible governing class, both locally and statewide and nationally, but it appears we do not.
No. And yeah, I think Charlie's exactly right. They want the teachers who are so inclined to be able to get out there and get in the streets. And how many of these people are teachers? This is from this morning now in Minneapolis.
You're Nazis!
So what happened just now is that these Border Patrol officers have gotten themselves surrounded by the
Hopefully that situation de-escalated. I haven't heard that it got worse, so hopefully everything went there. But the whipping up probably is not helping whatsoever.
Greg, please tell me that woman was not a history teacher. And then secondly,
who knows?
And just for listeners, that was somebody who was yelling "funk you," right? Funk. That was a
Gosh. All right, moving right along. Let's talk about other issues that your business might be dealing with, and that's keeping the books straight. And sometimes it can get complicated, especially if you've got, your company's paying for the gas or supplies. If you've got a construction crew, landscaping, a lot of different things have to be purchased on the fly, and it can't always come right from the central office there. And so people buy it, and then they have to get reimbursed and that sort of thing. And it can become a real hassle. Well, Coast Pay is the solution to all that because it fixes any problems by showing you exactly who's buying what, where they're buying it, and why, and finally giving you the control your old fuel card never did.
With Coast Pay, you see every transaction the moment that it happens. So there's no more end-of-the-month surprises, and if somebody tries to fill up at an odd time or buy something that's outside their limit, you're going to know instantly. This is a special announcement for all of our listeners in Minnesota. Fraud protection actually works with Coast. No more shared personal information numbers, no missing receipts, no guessing. Employees check in by text. Coast verifies the purchase, and you stay in control.
Yeah, and right now, Coast Pay is offering 3 Martini Lunch listeners free gas for a day when you get started at coastpay.com/3ml. Go to coastpay.com/3ml to get free gas for a whole day. Terms apply. That's coastpay.com/3ml. The Coast Visa Commercial Credit Card is issued by Celtic Bank. All card accounts are subject to credit approval. All right, Jim, moving on from Minneapolis, at least for one martini today, and that is to take a look at 2026 in the midterm elections. There are a number of Senate seats that are considered competitive or at least open, and one of those is in Iowa, where Joni Ernst is not running for a third term. I think most prognosticators expect Republicans to hold that seat, although we don't know who the nominee is going to be yet. There's Ashley Hinson, the congresswoman who seems to be not only the president's choice, but the main party choice. But there's now speculation swirling around Kari Lake. Yeah, the same Kari Lake who ran for governor of Arizona in 2022 and U.S. Senate in Arizona in 2024. Did not win. She's now the head of Voice of America and has radically reduced, if not mostly shuttered, that organization. But she grew up in Iowa, graduate of the University of Iowa, and she's recently purchased property in the state of Iowa. So now there's speculation swirling that she might be interested in running this time or in 2028 if the nearly immortal Chuck Grassley decides not to run for yet another term when he's 95 years old. But I wouldn't put it past him. He's in really good shape. Anyway, Jim, I don't know that Kari Lake has said anything about this. But the speculation is already swirling, so somebody out there is trying to put the pieces together, it seems.
The statement that she put out upon, making this purchase, I love Iowa. It's where I was raised, where I went to college, where so much of my story began. Expanding our roots there means being closer to family and closer to the values that shaped me. This is a prepared statement that was released. Right now, I am focused on my mission to help President Trump make America great again on the work ahead, because that's what's good for America. Well, what's good for America is good for both Arizona and Iowa. So it's not saying I'm going to run for Senate in Iowa. It's also not saying that she's not going to run, and she certainly seems like she's leaving that open. This just handed to me. Scott Brown has said, come on, lady, take a hint. Scott Brown, of course, is running for Senate in New Hampshire. This is wait, I know that name. Yes, this is the guy who won the Senate race in Massachusetts as a Republican and then was not able to beat Elizabeth Warren. It's very tough to beat Democrats repeatedly in the state of Massachusetts. He did not actually say that. I'm making that joke as a point of irony. Kari Lake, haven't you done enough damage already? Haven't you? By the way, like, you have a job. Now, admittedly, there's not much left of Voice of America, so she may feel like that. But just as you and I earlier this week were talking about, if you get elected to the House of Representatives, you really should serve the full 2-year term. You should not quit early. If you get elected to the Senate, it's a 6-year term. But again, unless it's a serious health issue for yourself, serious health issue for a member of your family, you signed on for the full term. I feel very similarly to getting appointed to the cabinet. Now, if you want to go to the president, I think there's a great opportunity for me to run for office here. I'd really like to do that, and the president's fine with it. Fine. But I really feel like if the president gives you a job, that's for the remainder of the term. That's not like look, I'm making you head of Voice of America until something better comes along. It's not, you're not a placeholder or something like that. Look, Kari Lake has dressed, she looked very competitive in that governor's race, then said everybody who supported John McCain, you could leave. And, I don't know if listeners know this, but John McCain was pretty darn popular in Arizona for a long time. Did not do any better in the Senate race, even when Trump was winning the state, by the way. So that's just a sign of this is someone who needs to find something else to do with her time besides losing winnable Senate races. And, it looks like she had one in the Trump cabinet, and I don't see why she would do it. Again, she's not saying she's running, but she's also not saying she's not running. I think it would be better if we could, throw cold water on the hot embers of whatever political passions burn in the heart of Kari Lake.
Yeah. The whole, no, I couldn't possibly think about that now. I've got a job that I have to do.
Then why are you putting, then the words missing from your statement are, I'm not going to run for Senate in Iowa,
right,
where I haven't lived for a long time, but I've got a vacation home there now. Yeah, so.
Yeah, even if you grew up there, it's a little bit kind of parachuting back in there, if that's indeed your intent. If she's just looking for a place to spend, cooler summers, good for her. But that doesn't necessarily seem to be the case yet. But we'll see. Jim, busy day. Who knows what we'll have tomorrow? But I'll see you then.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Please be sure to subscribe to the 3 Martini Lunch if you don't already, and tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. They really do help us. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Greg Corombos. Follow us also at 3 Martini Lunch on Facebook and Instagram. Have a great Thursday, and please join us again Friday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.